few hours ago, I met with the Lieutenant Governor of British Columbia, Janet Austin, and she has granted my request to dissolve the Legislative Assembly, and the general election will be held in British Columbia on Saturday, October 24th.
After weeks of speculation, BC NDP Leader John Horgan has made it official. As you heard there, voters in that province will head to the polls on October 24th. The province's next scheduled date for an election was October 16th of next year. So why did the BC NDP decide to roll the dice on a new mandate a year early and at the beginning of a pandemic, as John Horgan characterized it earlier today? Rob Shaw is the legislative columnist for the Vancouver Sun and a good friend of the show. He joins us from Victoria in British Columbia. Hi, Rob. Great to see you as always.
Hi, Vashi. Thanks for having me on.
So at this early juncture, right at the start of the campaign, how much of this decision was guided, do you think, or are your sources telling you, by what we have heard reported over and over the past few weeks, being that John Horgan's polling so incredibly high, this was a great political opportunity for him?
Yeah, it's pretty much all to do with polling out here. I know that John Horgan was out on the campaign trail on day one today saying, no, that's not the issue. The issue is stability of government. But the NDP's partners here in British Columbia, the Greens, have said they spoke to Mr. Horgan as recently as Friday and assured him there will be a stable government. The Greens will continue to give him the votes that he needs. So what this really was about was Horgan looking at the polls, realizing that he could shake free of the BC Greens, that he could, if he acted now, potentially sweep a much larger majority government than his current minority. And he wants to strike when that iron is hot. And he will spend much of this campaign, it's clear from day one, explaining to voters to try and get around that sort of sniff test they have where they go, you had another 13 months in office and it looked pretty stable to us. Are you sure this isn't just a power grab? And I think he's going to have to wrestle with that question on the trail for sure.
Yeah, I want to ask you about his sort of initial answers to that sniff test. But first, can you help, for viewers who are not super aware of everything going on in BC, how big is that gap in the polls right now? Like, how far ahead is John Horgan according to most of the polls?
Well, he's at record high levels, so he's the most popular premier in the country according to national polling. And here in British Columbia, if there was an election held with the numbers that he has as of voting day, he would sweep to a vast majority. The NDP are at the highest levels they've ever seen here. And that's good news, I guess, if you're a strategist in the NDP who realizes that this election is fought on this kind of suburban Metro Vancouver ridings, of which like more than half of BC's total ridings are just in Metro Vancouver. And the NDP will live or die based on that. So they're at the highest. They look at the political landscape right now. They see a weakened Liberal Party, a Green Party that just had a leadership race, and they look at their polling numbers and say it hasn't looked this good for the NDP maybe 20 to 30 years.
What are the main risks to that actually playing out? We've had a lot of these discussions at the federal level when we're trying to sort of talk through strategy. We are in a pandemic, right? And every time you poll Canadians on whether they want an election, the majority of them do not. But as we saw in New Brunswick, rather, it's not like the person who called one there was punished for it. I know the situation is obviously not perfectly analogous, but what's your sense of the risk that the pandemic poses for the NDP in this election?
Well, there's a couple of risks. I guess one is the voter blowback, that the government might be kind of leaderless if our numbers continue to rise. We have the sort of highest per capita number of COVID cases in the country right now, 18 exposure notifications in schools here. If things get out of control during the more than 30-day campaign, I think the premier risks getting the public kind of backlash of what are you doing and why are you doing this? Another thing that the NDP need is they need the moderate voters of British Columbia. If this just comes down to loyal New Democrats voting, history has shown us in BC there's not enough New Democrats here to win a majority government. It's barely ever happened in our history. And so what the NDP needs is a kind of middle road moderates that showed up in 2017, the kind of people that Prime Minister Trudeau and former NDP leader Jack Layton we're trying to whip up that sense of hope and optimism. And they came to the NDP in Metro Vancouver. And if this becomes a kind of cynical, bad taste in voters' mouth kind of election, those voters may sit on their hands. And the partisan New Democrats will still vote, but it won't be enough to get them over the finish line. And this is an all or nothing campaign for John Horgan. He can't go back to a minority government and look for the BC Green support anymore. By doing this early election, he tore up the agreement he had with the Greens, where in writing he promised not to go to the polls early. So there's no going back. He's all in or he's back in opposition. And I think the voters are going to have to decide whether or not he still looks like that same guy, that happy Horgan that appeared in 2017, or he looks like a kind of old, power-grabbing, classic politician. And I think that's going to define the entire campaign. I've
just got a minute left, but I want to make sure we make our viewers across the country aware of the other parties running in this election. We did have the leader of both, the new leader, I should say, of the Greens, Sonia Furstenau, as well as the leader of the Liberal Party, Mr. Wilkinson, on last week. What do people in this country need to know about their two parties in this election campaign?
Yeah, well, the opposition Liberals I've already said today that they plan on running on a lot of the themes that kind of kneecapped them in the last election campaign, which is childcare, housing affordability. They did a very poor job explaining those, but they realized that it's going to have to be central to their campaign this time. Mr. Wilkinson is a relative unknown. He hasn't had a chance to really kind of get his profile up, and I think the Liberals are quite worried about that. Everyone knows who John Horgan is across the entire country because of the relatively good job he's done on the public health response. Sonia Furstenau is what used to be a partner of John Horgan as the Green leader and as a Green MLA, used to be a partner in that power-sharing agreement. And she feels particularly betrayed by Horgan going to the polls early. And she was visibly angry today, saying it's untrue. This government is stable. The Greens would still back it. This is all on John Horgan. And no matter what excuses he comes up with, the Greens are going to now campaign pretty hard against the NDP. So it's like kind of one of those falling outs of best friends where you know each other's weaknesses and secrets. That's what's going to happen with the Greens and NDP. It's going to be a very vicious fight here in BC. Probably one of the most vicious we've seen in a while.
Yeah, and certainly an interesting dynamic for those of us watching from the outside. Thank you so much, Rob. Appreciate your insights as always.
Okay, anytime. Thank you.
Rob Shaw is the legislative columnist for the Vancouver Sun. He's in Victoria, British Columbia.
And I believe stability is what's required, not just for 12 months, but for the next 4 years. And that's what I'm going to be asking British Columbians to support me about. And if they don't, they don't.
Today, John Horgan chose politics over people. For no good reason whatsoever, we're now being forced into a general election that nobody in British Columbia wants except the NDP.
This is an irresponsible and unnecessary election that he's posing, and whatever excuses he's making up for it, let's be clear. This is about him and his party putting their fortunes ahead of British Columbians at a time when people are worried about their jobs, their financial security, their children, and their health.
NDP leader John Horgan has pulled the plug on his minority government in BC. He says the province needs stability over the long term to get through the pandemic. Did he mount a convincing argument today, or could calling the election in the, quote, beginning of a pandemic, as he put it, backfire? Time for the Power Panel to weigh in on that. Over in Toronto, Melissa Lantsman, National Vice President of Enterprise Canada, joins us. Also, are you in Toronto, Brad? I thought you were over in BC.
I'm actually in Langley, British
Columbia.
Sorry,
the prompter is wrong. I was excited to hear that you were in BC, and that's part of the reason why we're discussing BC. So Brad Levine with Council Public Affairs is in British Columbia, as I said, in Langley, and over in Montreal, Yolande James, former Quebec Liberal Cabinet Minister. Hi, everybody. Good to see you.
Hey. Hi, guys.
So I will, since we are talking about beautiful British Columbia, I will start over in British Columbia with Brad. Brad, the main criticism being leveled against John Horgan right now is that he is doing this simply because he looked at the poll numbers and saw political opportunity. Do you think that's true?
Well, I think that the opposition will do their level best to put that argument forward. But I thought John Horgan's statement earlier today about that he's looking at the big as he's saying that we're far from over with the pandemic, that before the province sets down a particular path for the economy, for supports for people, on what path to take in the economic recovery. He says, let's go to British Columbians and see which path they wish to choose, John Horgan and the NDPs, or Mr. Wilkinson and the BC Liberals. So, process stories always, we always spend the first day or so when an election gets called on process stories. That is the norm. But once British Columbians start talking about the issues, talking about what they want to see from their next government, I think the people will move on from the process stories that I know a lot of pundits and opposition parties like to talk about. But all in all, I think he's basically said, look, 3.5 years. We've got a lot of stuff done, but this pandemic has changed everything. And now it's time for the people to choose which path when we look at the economic recovery coming out of this pandemic. I think it's a very compelling case that he's put forward.
Yolande, we certainly saw in New Brunswick, for example, to Brad's point, that the process story died very quickly and the focus turned to something else. Do you think it will be the same in British Columbia? And again, I take Brad's point on kind of dismissing it as a process story, but like the pandemic has taken a bit of a different shift. This isn't just like, me getting into the weeds on a normal election call. We're in the middle of a pandemic where the beginning, as John Horgan says, it's taken a bit of a different shift in British Columbia right now. Do you think that factors in for more than a day, I guess is my basic question.
I think I'll start with the part that I agree with Brad. I'm feeling nice today. No, I'm kidding. I feel like the process, as you guys said, part of it will dissipate in 24 to 48 hours. Once we're in election, we've talked about this before, people will accept that we're in election. But that does not mean, as far as I'm concerned, that John Horgan's decision to do an election under these circumstances is not a big risk for him. Yes, we can say that it worked well for Higgs last week, and he's thinking his favorables, personal ones, are very good. His opposition might not be that strong. The fact that his polling numbers are good. But when you are unable, and as far as I'm concerned, he was really unable to say, let's see, what is it that I want to do today that I can't do, that if you give me a full mandate on October 24th, I will be able to do. He has not been able to explain that. And as far as I'm concerned, that puts him at risk to the electorate. So he better have a really good campaign, because there are instances where this has backfired. I think to Quebec here and Pauline Marois' election in 2014, where the polls were good, but she really didn't have a reason. And then all of a sudden, outside factors made everything unravel. And the pandemic being one of those areas where things can shake things up, as people as today was announced here, we are in the second wave. That does put him at risk. So while I can't say what the result will be, I certainly think that it's not a done deal.
That's a very interesting point. And certainly today, Melissa, in his press conference, Mr. Horgan went to great lengths to say, like, the reason for this is stability. And the question that was in my head was whether or not British Columbians will be convinced that they need to re-elect, to elect him with a larger mandate, I guess I should say, in order to get that stability.
Yeah, look, I think there's a risk for Mr. Horgan here that is greater than zero, but it's not much greater than zero. We know you can have a safe election, even with rising pandemic numbers. And I think it's incumbent upon the opposition to start talking about something else as soon as possible, to put something on the table for British Columbians. The weak spot for an NDP government, and I know that the NDP will go to lengths to make it Mr. Horgan versus a Wilkinson election, is they're not seen as the best economic managers for a sustained economic future for British Columbians. That is their weak spot. That said, they need to flip 3 seats. It's not that hard for him to do that, so it's a well-calculated risk. And if the campaign started like it did today, and if you look at Mr. Horgan's announcement, you look in that left top corner of your screen, and there's garbage cans there, and it looked all messy, and he didn't have a message. If that's the John Horgan that British Columbians are going to see, then I think that he's maybe miscalculated this risk.
What did you think, Brad, of that initial press conference? I've seen so many in which Mr. Horgan is, kind of the standout of press conferences, often with other premiers, for example. I definitely noticed off the top of this one, it almost seemed like there were a bit of nerves. He kind of anticipated questions on this, the skeptical questions around why now. But like Yolande pointed out, didn't exactly have, other than pointing to one bill this summer, which he said that the opposition opposed, didn't have this really robust argument as to why stability was unachievable right now.
Right. Well, I think that from what I could read, what the goal was today was to begin the process of outlining why now, because that's obviously going to be one of the first questions that people ask. Because I think there was lots of the drum was beating there for a number of weeks there. Some people called it the worst kept secret, but nonetheless, he's got about 29 or 30 more days in which he has to outline that vision. Today, he was outlining why he wants to go. So I think if he can, credibly win that argument with the look, we've got, two major parties with two competing visions on where we want to go. You have the right to decide, before we get down too far down a particular path, you get to choose which one it is. If he can win that day, or at least argue that to a draw, I think he'll be ahead at the end of the day. But starting first thing tomorrow, I'm expecting to hear about that vision and what the NDP's plan for the next 4 years is. He wants to get a mandate for. What will that entail? And contrast that with Mr. Wilkinson. Mr. Wilkinson has, a couple of days to maybe say this. He's choosing politics over people, as he did from the clip that you just showed. But he's going to have to talk about what his vision is for the province, starting, first thing tomorrow morning as well.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.